good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Welcome back to Matthew Explores, and this is History in a Pint, episode 3. The local history series where the past is just a few steps from the pub. I'm Matthew, and in this episode we are taking a short stroll starting at the garden bar at Eastbourne Harbour. So when I mentioned that I was going to start at a garden bar, someone said to me, you can't get much history there, it was only built a few years ago. Well, that's not true. We are going to go and uncover some hidden stories and curious landmarks. In this historic part of Sussex, we're going to find history relating to the railways and the war, to shipwrecks and murders. So come with me as we stroll around Eastbourne Harbour, taking the sights and uncover the area's past. So grab a drink, take a stroll, let's dive into the stories that built this part of Eastbourne. This is History in a Pint, where every pint has a connection to the past. So for our first destination around the harbour, we are heading towards the harbour mouth and the twin sentinels, the Martello Towers at Eastbourne Harbour. Numbered 66 and 67, they were among the final links in a once mighty defensive chain. Their stout forms may seem quaint today, but nestled between the boats and the beachside cafes, their walls whisper tales of invasion, innovation and reinvention. Born in the early 1800s, the Martello Towers were Britain's answer to a looming Napoleonic threat. Inspired by the robust round tower at Martello Point in Corsica, which had famously held off the British assault, these squat circular forts were designed to resist cannon fire and hold a small garrison. Over 100 were built between 1805 and 1812 along the south coast. From Suffolk to Seaford, Eastbourne alone had 14. Only a few remain, including these ones, number 66 and 67. Tower 66 is a textbook example. The round thick walls, and once crowned by a cannon that could swivel nearly 360 degrees. It was strategically placed to guard the marshy coastline near where Eastbournes Sovereign Harbour now stands. Its job: deter, delay and if needed fight off French forces landing on the beach. Each tower housed around 25 men crammed into one room with a fireplace, sleeping bunks and a central pillar to hold up the roof. Water came via a rooftop cistern that collected rain, and the soldiers' views across the shingle, a lonely vigil broken only by drills, weather and the distant crash of waves. Tower 67, just inland from its twin, a curious placement today, but in 1805 this area was open ground. Its role was more reinforcement and relay. Positioned to fire across the flank and support Tower 66, the towers worked in tandem, creating overlapping arcs of fire and communication points in case of French landings. Together these two sentinels helped form the very southern edge of England's coastal defences. Construction was no small feat. Built of brick and flint with walls over 6 feet thick at the base, they could deflect cannonballs and resist small arms fire. The gun platform supported a heavy 24-pounder cannon, and powder was stored deep below, yet despite their strength they were never tested in combat. Napoleon turned away from England, and with him the urgency of the invasion faded. By the mid-19th century, Eastbourne was changing. The railway had arrived, seaside holidays were in vogue, and the silent Martello Towers, once primed for battle, found new lives. Some became coastguard posts, others were repurposed for housing, storage, or unfortunately left to decay. In the 20th century, Tower 66 saw use as a lookout post in both World Wars. In World War II, it played a small but steady role in local coastal observation. Post-war, with the development of the Sovereign Harbour in the 1990s, both towers were enveloped by modern housing and yacht basins, but they were preserved, standing now like round punctuation marks in the town's evolving narrative. Today, Tower 66 sits quietly near the entrance to Pacific Drive, while Tower 67 is just a short stroll inland, tucked among the landscape paths and waterside flats. You can't climb inside, but you can walk right up and touch the history. Each tower bears the scars of time, patches of repair, weathered stone and a heavy silence of long forgotten centuries. The towers stand firm firm and in good order, and they're a commanding part of the beach as intended, albeit now over paddle boarders and harbour tours rather than Napoleonic invasion. People walk by them every day and don't realise what they are, but if you stop and picture this area as it was, the shingles, salt marshes, not a building in sight, it's incredible how important these little forts once were. The Martello Towers of Eastbournes Harbour are not grand monuments, but they are stubborn survivors, guardians of a forgotten shoreline, round, rugged reminders that even quiet corners have stormy pasts. So next time you stroll past Towers 66 or 67, spare a thought for the men who watch the horizons not for beauty but for war. And now we are heading on to our next location, and just along the shoreline from Tower 67 we come across the wreck of the SS Barnhill. In the shadow of war off the coast of Eastbourne, a merchant ship met a fiery fate that would etch its name in maritime history. The story of the SS Barnhill, a tale of courage, tragedy and the indomitable spirit of those who risked everything to save others. Built in 1921 in Canada, the SS Barnhill was a 5,430 ton merchant steamship, part of Britain's vital supply chain during World War II. On the night of March the 20th, 1940, she was making her way up the English Channel, bound for London from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Her cargo, timber, carbide, zinc, copper and thousands of tins of food, precious resources in a nation under siege. Approximately 6 miles off Beachy Head, under the cover of darkness, the Barnhill's journey was violently interrupted. A lone German bomber, part of the Luftwaffe's early Channel campaign, swooped in and 2 bombs struck the vessel, one down the funnel and the other midship. The explosions tore through the ship, igniting the timber and carbide. Flames engulfed the decks. The bridge was blown from the foredeck and 5 members of crew were killed, 4 instantly and another one later in hospital. The remaining 29 members of crew were trapped aboard a burning ship, adrift in the channel, but help was on the way. The Eastbourne lifeboat was launched into the night, led by coxswain Michael Hardy, and the crew braved the darkness along with other merchant vessels, and the lifeboat took on board the survivors, numbering 28. Believing all the survivors had been saved, but they were wrong. Captain Michael O'Neill had been blown from the bridge and lay unconscious beneath the debris. When he awoke, injured and alone, he crawled across the burning deck. With a broken arm and collarbone and 5 fractured ribs, he couldn't ring the ship's bell with his hands, so he gripped the rope in his teeth and shook his head to sound the alarm. The bell was heard, the Jane Holland returned. Against all odds, they found Captain O'Neill and brought him safely ashore, where he'd spend months in hospital recovering from his injuries, but recover he did. The wreck of the Barnhill drifted towards Eastbourne, visible from the shore, and guests at the Grand Hotel rushed to help survivors. Thousands of tins of cargo washed ashore, an unexpected bounty for ration-weary locals. For their bravery, lifeboatmen Thomas Alcorn and Alec Huggett were awarded the bronze medals. The ship's owners donated £105 to the RNLI in gratitude. The town of Eastbourne had witnessed not just a tragedy, but a triumph of human spirit. Today, fragments of the SS Barnhill still lie beneath the waves off Langley Point, and at very low tide, the rusted remnants of the boilers lay silent witness to a night of fire and heroism. The SS Barnhill may have sunk, but her story still floats on a tide of memory etched in the soul of Eastbourne, and a legacy for those who dared to save lives when all seemed lost. The bombing of the Barnhill was one of the first times that a British merchant ship was bombed from the air, and it signalled a shift in German tactics, targeting not just military assets, but the very arteries of Britain's survival, its merchant fleet. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next location, although this one doesn't really have a location as it's all been built over, and it's about the history of what used to be here on the site prior to the harbour, and that was the Crumbles. the shingle wasteland. The area of the harbour now was once a shingle wasteland, and it was a key part of Eastbourne's industrial past. Before Eastbourne had its neat lawns and luxury flats at the harbour, the Crumbles were home to the Eastbourne Ballast Railway. The Crumbles were a rugged, desolate stretch of shingle that hummed with industry, echoing with the clatter of wagons and the hiss of steam. The tale of Eastbourne's Ballast Railway, a long-lost line etched in the stones of local history. In the 19th century, Eastbourne was booming. Victorian developers wanted sea walls, promenades and buildings, all of which needed a reliable source of building material. Just east of the town, the vast barren Crumbles offered exactly that. Millions of tons of compacted shingle, perfect for ballast for railways and construction alike. But transporting it was no small feat. Enter the Eastbourne Ballast Railway, a humble industrial lifeline whose story, though often overlooked, helped shape Eastbourne as we know it today. The railway began operation around the 1870s, stretching from the ballast pits across the Crumbles to a jetty and loading point near Langley Point. Shingle was dug by hand, tough work in all weathers, and loaded onto small wagons. Pulled by small industrial locomotives, they puffed along the rails, spewing smoke and steam as they trundled across the shingle wilderness. The line was worked mostly by local men, labourers, navvies and former agricultural workers, drawn by the promise of steady, if backbreaking work. For them, the Crumbles was a hard and hungry place. There were few shelters, the work was dirty, the wind seemed to blow straight through you, yet this railway was vital. The ballast itself went far beyond Eastbourne. It helped build sections of the Brighton to Hastings line, and it was even used in the construction of the Thames Embankment in London. There are whispers of Eastbourne stone buried in the capital's foundation. By the early 20th century, the Crumbles began to change. Eastbourne expanded, houses crept eastward, and the shingle extraction slowed. The railway, once a vital artery, began to rust and vanish beneath a tide of progress. But as a ghost it lingers on. One stretch of the railway ran just behind what is now Princess Park, and if you ask the right person in the right pub, you'll find someone whose grandfather remembers the screech of metal wheels on the early morning dew. That's the ballast line across the Crumbles. And now, as we move on to our last bit of history for the Crumbles area, we are looking at something completely different, and this is the terrible tragedies of the murders that happened on the Crumbles. Before Sovereign Harbour's yachts, Crumbles was a desolate stretch of shingle, haunted by sea winds and eerie silences. In the early 20th century, this unlit wilderness east of Eastbourne became the backdrop for not one but two chilling murder cases that shocked Britain and etched the Crumbles into a national memory. Our first story begins in 1920. In the aftermath of the First World War, on a summer evening in August, 17-year-old Irene Monroe, a typist from London, arrived in Eastbourne to visit a friend, but she never made it. Days later, her body was found in the shingle of the Crumbles, battered and partially buried. She had been lured there by two ex-soldiers, Jack Field and William Gray. The pair had fabricated a story about a film audition to gain her trust. What followed was an ambush, robbery turned murder in the barren, empty spaces between civilization and the sea. Field and Gray were arrested, and their trial at Lewis courts gripped the country. Testimonies revealed the callous plot and brutal killing. They showed no remorse, and in December 1920, both men were hanged for the crime. The public thought the horror was over, but the Crumbles had not yet finished with its dark tales. Just 4 years later, another young woman was murdered in almost exactly the same place. Emily Kay had recently become involved with a man named Patrick Mahon. The relationship was complicated. Mahon was married and Emily was expecting a child. They travelled together to a small bungalow on the Crumbles for what she believed would be a fresh start. Instead, it was a death trap. What happened inside the bungalow remains chilling. Emily disappeared. Mahon claimed she'd gone to South Africa, but the railway staff became suspicious of some oddly heavy trunks Mahon transported from Eastbourne to Waterloo. One trunk they discovered was packed with bloodied clothes and body parts. Police returned to the Crumbles and uncovered the grim truth. Emily's remains had been dismembered and scattered. Mahon later admitted to the killing, but insisted it was an accident and that she died during an argument and he'd panicked. The jury saw right through that and didn't believe him, and he was hanged at Wandsworth Prison later that year. What you have to imagine is now all the bright lights of the harbour. The Crumbles area was not like that. Back then there was no lights, no houses, just shingle and sea. You could scream and no one would hear you, and that's what made the Crumbles so terrifying and so useful for men like Mahon. By the 1990s this bleak coastline was transformed. The shingle pits, the crime scenes were buried between Eastbourne's newest marina. Luxury flats and boardwalks replaced the shadows of the past. So that's a few bits of history from the area. But before we finish with our pint at the Garden Bar, just a little bit of history about the harbour. The Sovereign Harbour, Eastbourne's coastal reinvention and one of the UK's largest marina developments. It's a story that began with a vision for Eastbourne. Long before the buzz of the cafes and the clinks of wine glasses, this place was known as the Crumbles, the bleak expanse of shingle and scrubland, once feared for its isolation and haunted by the memories of crimes. But by the late 20th century the Crumbles had lost its menace and had become prime real estate. It was in the 1990s that work began the dream to transfer Eastbourne's forgotten shore into the bustling marina community. The result, the Sovereign Harbour, a network of 4 harbours connected by sea locks lined with homes, shops and the waterside leisure. It wasn't just about sailing. Sovereign Harbour became a gateway to a new lifestyle, blending Eastbourne's genteel charm with fresh nautical flair, and at the very heart of the transformation emerged a local favourite, the Garden Bar. Tucked away just beside the waterfront, the Garden Bar is more than a watering hole. It's a community hub with a coastal soul. What was once shingle wasteland is now a vibrant terrace bustling with colour and the clinking of glasses. An all-day destination where locals unwind and visitors get their first taste of Eastbourne hospitality. From summer DJs to quiet winter coffees, the Garden Bar mirrors the harbour's evolution, resilient, rejuvenated and rooted in seaside pleasure. It speaks to how history adapts, not erasing the past, but by toasting what was possible. Eastbourne Harbour began as a gamble and a bet on turning forgotten land into something extraordinary, and from the grit of the Crumbles grew not just the moorings and markets, but moments like this shared at the Garden Bar. And that's it. As we're back at the Garden Bar, there's only one more thing to do, and that's to have my pint at the end of the programme. And let's be honest, the series is called History and a Pint, so we need that pint. Today I have chosen Hawkstone Lager from the Jeremy Clarkson Diddley Squat Farm, and according to their website they only use the highest quality hops and it takes longer to mature, but it makes it easier to drink. And I concur, it's a pretty decent pint. So cheers all, and until next time, don't forget to like, subscribe and share. And that's all from me from Matthew Explores and History and a Pint. Bye for now.